If you have been around a narcissistic woman for any length of time, you already know how draining it can be. You can walk into one conversation feeling calm and leave it doubting your memory, your tone, your intentions, and even your character. You try to stay respectful, but somehow you still end up in the wrong. You explain yourself clearly, but your words get twisted. You give patience, empathy, loyalty, and benefit of the doubt, and instead of bringing peace, it seems to give her more power over your emotional state. After a while, the deepest exhaustion is not even the arguing. It is the confusion. It is the feeling that no matter what you do, you cannot land on solid ground. And that confusion matters, because it often makes you think the problem must be you. Maybe you were too sensitive. Maybe you should have stayed quieter. Maybe you should have chosen better words, shown more love, more patience, more understanding. But if you constantly had to shrink yourself, defend your reality, and recover from interactions that left you emotionally depleted, then the issue was not simply that you were failing to communicate. The issue was that you were dealing with a pattern built on control, imbalance, and emotional manipulation. That is why normal efforts did not create normal results. A lot of people think the way to stay strong around a narcissistic woman is to become harder, colder, sharper, or more dominant. But that usually pulls you deeper into the trap. The real way to stay untouchable is not by winning her game. It is by refusing to be emotionally managed by it. It is by understanding what is happening clearly enough that you stop reacting from confusion. Because once you understand the pattern, you stop taking the bait the same way. And when she can no longer easily pull you into guilt, panic, proving, explaining, or chasing, something changes. You begin to get your center back. At the core of this dynamic is control. Not always obvious control, not always loud control. Sometimes it comes through charm, vulnerability, seduction, helplessness, emotional intensity, mixed signals, or selective affection. But the goal is often the same: to keep the emotional focus centered on her needs, her moods, her version of reality, and her access to your attention. That is why you may have felt like you were always adjusting. The rules kept changing. What pleased her yesterday offended her today. What she demanded from you, she did not offer in return. And whenever you started noticing the imbalance, the conversation somehow shifted back onto your flaws. One of the first things to understand is that her reactions were often not really about the surface issue. A small disagreement could turn into a full emotional storm because the real trigger was not what you said. It was that she felt challenged, exposed, not prioritized, or not in control. When someone has narcissistic traits, even small moments can feel like threats to the image they need to protect. So instead of dealing honestly with discomfort, they may attack, deflect, blame, withdraw, or rewrite the situation. If you did not understand this, you probably kept trying to solve the stated problem while the real issue remained hidden underneath. That is why so many conversations felt impossible. You were trying to resolve conflict while she was trying to regain control. This is also why explaining yourself rarely worked the way you hoped. Healthy people usually want clarity. Manipulative people often want leverage. So when you offered long explanations, vulnerable honesty, or detailed defense, you may have thought you were building understanding. But in many cases, you were simply giving her more material to distort, dismiss, or use later. She did not need your explanation to understand you. She often understood enough already. The problem was that understanding you was never the priority. Managing the emotional outcome was. Another pattern is the emotional role she assigned to you. Around a narcissistic woman, you may stop being a full human being in the relationship and start becoming a function. Maybe you became the stabilizer, the rescuer, the admirer, the guilty one, the patient one, the one who comes back first, the one who absorbs blame, or the one who keeps the peace no matter the cost. These roles do not form by accident. They form because they keep the system running, and the longer you stay in that role, the harder it becomes to recognize yourself. You start thinking your value comes from how well you manage her instability, but real connection does not require one person to disappear so the other can remain comfortable. This is why staying untouchable starts with seeing the role clearly. If she is only warm when you agree, only affectionate when you obey, only peaceful when you do not bring up your needs, then what she is rewarding is not intimacy. She is rewarding compliance. That distinction is painful, but it is freeing. Because once you see that, you stop chasing genuine closeness through performance. You stop trying to earn safety from someone who only gives it conditionally. A narcissistic woman may also create intensity that feels like connection at first. The attention can be strong. The chemistry can feel immediate. The bond can seem unusually deep, especially if she mirrors your desires, values, pain, or dreams in the beginning. But intensity is not the same as emotional safety. In fact, one of the reasons people stay trapped so long is because the highs feel meaningful enough to excuse the lows. You hold on to the version of her that seemed loving, open, magnetic, and deeply connected, and you keep hoping that if you say the right thing or love her the right way, that version will return consistently. But what keeps you stuck is often not the current reality. It is the memory of a version of her that appears just often enough to keep you attached. That attachment can start to feel like obsession, and many people judge themselves for that. They ask, why am I still so affected? Why do I still think about her? Why does one text or one cold look throw me off for hours? The answer is not weakness. It is conditioning. Unpredictable affection creates strong attachment because your nervous system gets trained to keep seeking relief from the same person who causes the distress. You become hyper-focused, not because the bond is healthy, but because the emotional cycle is unresolved. So, if you still feel pulled, it does not mean she was your soulmate. It may simply mean your body learned to stay alert around inconsistency. This matters because if you do not understand the nervous system side of it, you will keep making it a story about love. You will think the depth of your pain proves the depth of the connection. But pain is not proof of love. Sometimes it is proof that your boundaries were crossed so often that your sense of self became tangled with someone else's moods. Staying untouchable means you begin separating those things. You stop calling emotional dependency devotion. You stop calling instability passion. You stop calling confusion chemistry. Another thing that keeps people trapped is guilt. A narcissistic woman may know exactly how to make you feel cruel for pulling back. The moment you set a boundary, she may become the victim. The moment you speak calmly about your hurt, she may accuse you of attacking her. The moment you stop overgiving, she may say you have changed, become selfish, cold, disloyal, or abusive. This is one of the most effective forms of manipulation because it targets your conscience. If you are a decent person, you do not want to harm anyone, so you start overcorrecting. You soften your truth. You doubt your right to protect yourself. And little by little, guilt becomes the leash. But guilt is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Often, in manipulative dynamics, guilt shows up because you are finally doing something different. You are no longer abandoning yourself on schedule. You are no longer rescuing, appeasing, or proving your goodness every time discomfort appears. And when a person benefits from your lack of boundaries, your boundaries will feel offensive to them. That does not make the boundary wrong. It usually means it is necessary. To become untouchable, you have to stop measuring your actions by whether they keep her calm. that standard will destroy you, because her calm may depend on your silence, your surrender, or your self-betrayal. A better standard is this: am I being honest, respectful, and self-respecting at the same time? That is where your strength begins to return, not in controlling her reaction, but in staying aligned with yourself while she has it. This is where emotional detachment becomes important, and people often misunderstand that word. Detachment does not mean bitterness. It does not mean you become cruel, numb, arrogant, or punishing. It means you stop giving every mood, accusation, or performance immediate access to your inner world. You pause. You observe. You stop assuming that every emotional display is your responsibility to fix. You stop rushing to explain yourself just because she is upset. You stop treating her interpretation of you as the truth. That pause is powerful, because narcissistic dynamics often move fast. They rely on pressure, urgency, emotional flooding, sudden reversals, loaded accusations, silence designed to make you chase. If you do not pause, you react from fear. And when you react from fear, you usually move into one of four positions: defend, explain, apologize, or pursue. Those positions give away your center, not because those actions are always wrong, but because in this dynamic, they are often pulled out of you through manipulation, not mutual understanding. The untouchable person learns to slow the whole thing down. They hear the accusation and do not immediately collapse into self-defense. They notice the guilt trip and do not instantly abandon their boundary. They sense the withdrawal and do not rush to earn reconnection. They let the other person reveal their pattern without interrupting it with panic. That calm observation changes everything, because manipulation feeds on emotional access. If she cannot easily get inside your mind, the pattern weakens. You also need to understand that your peace will never come from getting her to admit what she did. That is one of the hardest truths to accept. Many people stay emotionally entangled because they are still waiting for the moment of honesty. The moment she finally says, "Yes, I twisted things. Yes, I used your love against you. Yes, I made you feel small because I needed control." But closure rarely comes that way. In fact, the more you need that admission, the longer she can keep you engaged. Real closure begins when your clarity no longer depends on her confession. That means you may have to accept what happened without the perfect final conversation. You may have to trust the pattern more than the promises. Trust the repeated outcome more than the temporary tenderness. Trust how your body felt after dealing with her more than the words she used in between. Your nervous system often recognized the truth before your mind was ready to name it. Boundaries are essential here, but they have to be real boundaries, not speeches about boundaries. A real boundary is not a long emotional explanation of what she should do differently. A real boundary is what you will do if the behavior continues. It is simple, it is clear, it is enforceable. It might sound like, "I'm not continuing this conversation if I'm being insulted." It might mean leaving, ending the call, refusing to argue over obvious distortions, or limiting access entirely. The power of a boundary is not in how well you explain it. The power is in whether you honor it. And this is where many people struggle, because enforcing a boundary can feel harsh when you have been trained to over-accommodate. But every time you fail to enforce one, You teach the other person that your limits are negotiable. More importantly, you teach yourself that your own discomfort is not serious enough to act on. Untouchable energy is not loud. It is consistent. It is the quiet decision that your peace is no longer available for emotional exploitation. Self-respect also means letting go of the fantasy that if you become perfect enough, you will finally be treated fairly. That fantasy keeps people trapped for years. If I become calmer, more supportive, less reactive, more understanding, maybe then she will stop. But no amount of perfection heals a dynamic built on entitlement and control. In fact, the more you overfunction, the more the imbalance can deepen. Your job is not to become so skillful that you can survive dysfunction forever. Your job is to recognize when survival has become too high a price. As you step back, you may notice grief. Not just grief over her, but grief over yourself. The version of you that kept hoping, the energy you spent, the peace you lost, the times you ignored your own instincts because you wanted to believe in the good. Let that grief be honest. It does not mean you are weak. It means you are finally telling the truth about what it cost you. And truth is healing, even when it hurts at first. With time, something steadier begins to grow. You stop needing to decode every mixed signal. You stop checking for emotional weather changes. You stop personalizing every cold shift, every jab, every attempt to provoke insecurity. You begin to see that her behavior was speaking about her patterns, not your worth. And that changes the emotional weight of everything. The things that once felt like proof that you were failing start to look more like evidence that the dynamic itself was unhealthy. Staying untouchable around a narcissistic woman is not about defeating her. It is about no longer being available for the role she assigned you. It is about becoming so rooted in reality that guilt, charm, blame, seduction, and emotional pressure stop moving you the way they used to. It is about understanding that your calm is not weakness, your distance is not cruelty, and your boundaries are not abuse. They are signs that you are coming back to yourself, and maybe that is the deepest shift of all. You stop asking, "How do I get her to finally treat me right?" And you start asking, "What do I need to do to protect my mind, my body, my peace, and my dignity?" That question changes your life, because it brings the focus back where it belongs, not on managing her, but on honoring yourself. If you are in that process now, be patient with yourself. Clarity does not always arrive all at once. Some days you will feel strong. Other days you may still feel pulled back into old doubt. That does not mean you are going backward. It means you are unlearning a pattern that affected your emotions deeply. Healing is often quiet. It looks like noticing sooner, reacting less, recovering faster, and choosing yourself without needing a dramatic reason. And eventually, peace stops feeling unfamiliar. You realize you no longer need chaos to feel connected. You no longer mistake intensity for love. You no longer hand your self-worth to someone who only values you when you are easy to control. You become harder to provoke, harder to confuse, and much harder to use. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself, too. That is what untouchable really means. It means your mind is no longer open territory for manipulation. Your heart is no longer begging for approval from the person who wounded it. Your soul is no longer negotiating with what it already knows. You see clearly. You stand calmly. You protect your peace. And from that place, healing is no longer just possible. It is already happening.